morning, everybody. Thank you for coming and joining my zombie horde. Two quick things before we get started. Number one, I appreciate everybody being here because when I hear, my experience has been when you hear compliance scans, people start to run as far and as fast as they can. And number two, a little bit of disappointment in the speakers on missing opportunity. This conference is themed after zombies, and I haven't seen a single zombie in a presentation yet. So if you came to see zombies, you are in for a treat because I have an entire zombie horde going to helping me with this presentation. And I do not mean you, I mean them. So my name is Petr Sidopulos. I also go by Checksum in the digital world. And if you don't know much about me or anything, I just put a few highlights of my professional career. The one thing I would highlight is the GIAC blog post, how I went from IT sysadmin to become GIAC security expert certified person. There are 5 pillars that I highlighted, what helped me on my career. And if your cybersecurity career is just getting started, I would hope that you can find some inspiration and tips that can help you. Why this talk then? Well, as it happened, when the call for papers came, I was working on a project elevating our compliance scans in my organization. And there have been several gotchas and interesting things that I came across, and I thought that I'm going to share that. And this is an excellent conference to do so. Now, compliance scan. So in the world of threat and vulnerability management, we do vulnerability scanning. And I would say that most people have that process down pretty well. We've been doing it for a long time. And so we're doing pretty good. But the compliance scans, that's the other aspect. And for most people, this is like compliance scans. What compliance scans? Never heard that, right? This is an illustrative sample of scan results. There are 182 failing findings and 209 passing. So you get about 54 or so percent compliance that's passing. But yet we have all the cybersecurity frameworks referencing that you need to have an established baseline and you need to be enforcing that. And that's, whether it's NIST, ISO, PCI DSS, every single cybersecurity framework will call this out. But why is it that we are not doing this? You don't have to, speak out, but if you are familiar with compliance scans at your organization, how does your scan look like? Do you run it at all, or does it look something like this? Now, this is not illustrative of our environment. This is just a sample scan that, based on my experience, most organizations' scan results will look something like this. Just a quick level set. Why we have the compliance scans and what they are. When you install a platform, being an operating system, a Kubernetes cluster, a cloud instance, whatever that is, it comes with the default settings, and they will be mostly insecure, or definitely have opportunity for improvement. And you may be wondering why that is. Why would vendors set me up for a failure and not secure the system? A good example is if you look in the world of cloud. Cloud is so magical, you can just put in credit card number and get the entire infrastructure built out with a few clicks. The problem is the cloud providers, they're competing with each other, and they want you to actually, if you try something, it should work, and it should work out of the box. So if you had Checksum's ultra secure cloud that you can sign up for, and it's secure by default and nothing works, then you will quickly move to some other place. We also need to have an industry benchmark that defines that, because it's my experience, no matter how qualified you may be, if you cannot point to a cybersecurity framework or some industry benchmark that you will point to, they will just not believe you that this is actually what you should be doing. So Center for Internet Security is a really good resource. They have CS benchmarks. And they call out with the security controls that you should be having benchmark as well. And that's critical control number 4. And then you need to have the scan to validate that the results, that the baseline that is recommended is actually what you have in your environment. Why is this so difficult? Why the results are so bad? I don't know how many of you have looked at a CS benchmark for any platform. I put in an illustration for Windows Server 2022. There are 320 checks for version 2 of the benchmark, and another 320 for version 3. You unfortunately don't know how many of those are the same. Windows 11, if you look at the workstation side, you get 380. So that's 380 line items that you have to go through and determine, are you going to take that recommendation, or do you need to deviate and you need to do something else? And if you think, well, let's go with Linux, that one is, more secure, easier to do, well, then you have 230 check marks in version 2 for Red Hat version 9. And inside of the benchmarks, you also have some variations. So to make it more difficult, as an example, in the world of Windows servers, there is a logon privilege, or a right actually, that is called impersonate client after authentication. So when you log into a system, you log in as the user, but the application needs to take action on your behalf and apply your permissions to whatever you are doing. So it makes sense that we need to have some entities and identities on Windows that will actually get this privilege. But you don't want to have all the users to have that, because then they could impersonate each other and you lose the audit trail. But there is a gotcha. If you run an IIS web server, then you are actually going to need to add the IIS users group, which gets created when you install that role. And now you have two different settings, because you should only apply it obviously to a server that has an IIS. Now, if you have an application that you built in-house, or it's a third-party tool that requires this to impersonate users as well, then probably the service account that it comes with or that you create, you will need to add this as well. And if you think back to the TVM tools, that vulnerability management tool, how easy is it to customize and add this specific service account to be present, and that's actually a passing scan. So what I'm looking for in a tool is, I can go and use a GUI or some easy way, and I can say, use this benchmark as is and do these custom deviations that I need in my environment. Looking at the industry leader Tenable, and it's just a tool, not necessarily picking up on them, but I have experience with that platform. They give you easy customization, but you have like maybe 10 or 12 line items, and they are tied to logon banner and the password complexity. So you can use, I know it's a little bit hard to read because the screenshot was gray, but it's easy to set these values and apply them, but your custom service account for the impersonate client role, that's actually much painful. Now, how painful? It's going to be, there is an XML file for Nessus or Tenable, and that is a 13 or 16,000 line gnarly XML code. It's plain text, so it's actually pretty easy to read through, and you get the sense of what they are doing with it. But making changes, now it's get a little bit difficult. So specific to this setting, this one actually says that's the 2.2.3 impersonate client after authentication. It has a logical OR, so this will pass if it has the admins, local network, and service accounts in it, or those accounts and the IIS. But the problem I see with this is, if I have a database server that gets compromised, I'm the threat actor, I'm going to create a local group called IIS users and accounts into that. Your compliance scan will come clean and says, yeah, this is good. Well, actually, it's not, right? So we cannot miss the functionality. If this hostname role is a web server running IIS, then apply these. Or if it is the custom application that you may have, this customization would be difficult to do. And as you have these deviations, then there is only so much you can do with the regex. So you can make a copy of these files and create different scan groups and group your host, all my database servers, all my web servers. And now you have 2 templates. And you need to keep them up to date. So you can see the manual nightmare of keeping this up to date would be just horrible. And when CIS releases a new version of this benchmark, then guess what? You're starting all over, right? And when the new version of OS comes, so Server 2025, you're going to start over. So we need some modularity, but there is really none that I've seen in this space. The CIS, really huge shout out to them. That team is awesome. They have a bunch of cool resources. I recommend you get the paid subscription, especially if you work for the state government, because then it's free. But what's kind of mind-boggling is you have benchmark IDs, and I was always hopeful that you can use these to track them from server 2016 to 19 to 22 and so on, and for version 1, 2, and 3 of the benchmark. But as you can see on this example, just 2, they keep changing the numbers. I mean, it's mostly there, but not exactly. So this easy-to-use ID that you would like to use for easy comparison, you unfortunately cannot do that. And they change it between the different versions. Also, if you look at Windows 10 and 11 enterprise benchmarks, the difference is roughly 18 settings that are net new for Windows 11. But to find out which ones, well, you need to actually dig through it. Right? The version control that is included is changes within the specific platform and benchmark, but not across. So I wish that CIS did a little bit better with this. Shouldn't there be an app for that? Well, yeah, the CIS actually has a Cat Pro. I don't know if anybody played with it. I explored it a little bit and ended up being like, the party of zombies looking at the broken gramophone player. The tool just does not scale across enterprise. It is very slow. It is insecure over the network. And if you do it locally, then you have to replicate the config file in a large binary that you need to copy. Inside of the CIS workbench, if you have the paid membership, you can actually fork a benchmark and create your own customizations. And I was really excited about that because that seemed like the easy button that I was looking for. Unfortunately, when you export this SCAP format of your customizations, Tenable just says, I cannot see that. I cannot read this. So this was a big disappointment for me. Now, I've been complaining, since we started, and I was promising as well that there is some hope, and I figured something out. And the easy solution actually for me was just to give up. And that's why I said in the beginning, thank you for coming, because when you see all of these things, then you're like, I need to be somewhere else. Thank you. Well, I'm just kidding, right, with this. I do have something. So as I was going through these, I have some realizations. Like, we have server 2016, 19, 22, and in 25 it will be the same. The settings don't necessarily change too much. You have 90% or so overlap. So, and when they release version 2 and 3, they make a few changes. They can change one thing, right? But now you get the new set of 300 plus settings. So what you can actually do is, if you compare what they have and create an abstract one benchmark that is Windows Server, regardless of the version of the benchmark of the Windows Server version, then you will actually kind of simplify that, instead of doing this 3 times, you are going to do it once and then refactor it for the other platforms. And you can do the same thing for Windows 11 and Red Hat. Like, the platforms don't necessarily change too much. If you can find, what the common settings are and work on enforcing those, then your benchmark or baseline is 90+% compliant, and the changes that come are easy to keep track of. So here are some practical tips if you had never started with the benchmark. And by the way, I'm talking about Windows Server at the Application Security Conference, but you can apply this to your Kubernetes, to your DevOps pipeline, to your cloud, because they, again, come with a default configuration that is meant to work out of the box and not be secure. And there will be a benchmark of sorts, maybe not CIS, even though they have some, that will define what it needs to be. And you need to go through what they say, what is acceptable to me, and how can I enforce it in my environment. So I would start, if you don't know where to start on your environment, then you need to look at what is on your network. And are you really sure that you know what is on your network today? Right? I don't know. If I told you you have Windows Millennium, maybe you'll be just laughing and not even believe that that's a real system, but it was. And I just kind of realized that as time goes on, some of the younger folks, they may be like, what, Windows Millennium? Was that like the Y2K bug type of thing or a joke from Microsoft? No, it was a real operating system, but we don't talk about it, much like Vista, right? We pretend like that didn't exist. So starting at the basics, and the critical controls call for this is critical control 1 and 2 is know your hardware and know your software. If you don't know what you have, how can you secure it and build any plan around it? If you don't know where to start, then few options. You can look at your crown jewels and start protecting that, because that's in the end, if that goes out of the door, that's a really bad day for you. You can also look at the largest attack surface, and that most likely will be the user's workstations, because the threat actor most likely will get through the users. And as they go and attack them, if the workstation is hardened and secure, I'm not saying that this will keep the bad guys out, but it will make it more resistant to just the commodity junk malware that you see all the time. And you may have some detection opportunities to see when something fails that shouldn't. You can also look at which platform is the most prevalent that you have. So if you have the most of Server 2019 or Red Hat Linux 9, maybe start there. So the bad news is I did not find any shortcut or magic solution to not go through the benchmark. And there are, as I said, 300 plus settings. The really bad news is you will need to go through that and make a decision. Now, the good news is if you go through that effort, then the next version, especially if you combine them, it will be a lot easier to do. Now, depending on your organizational culture and how comfortable you are as a security person talking to IT, you may have good news or bad news. You will need to work with them because according to NIST, it is actually the IT custodian who is responsible for coming up with what the baseline looks like in your environment. And you can throw a pizza party. I really like that. By the way, I forget to give credit to Microsoft Copilot because that's where all these pictures came from. I'm not this artistic, and you can see how that it's AI generated because of the M&Ms on pizza, or maybe peas, green peas. And maybe try it at home. So after you sweet talk IT and get a work session, you can go through this. You can get a quick win, and quick is relatively speaking. And this is a crazy code that I wrote. It's actually a pseudocode because this is AppSec conference, but I'll show you a picture on the next slide how to make it easy to understand. So let's take Windows Server 22 as our starting baseline. We have 320 line items to go through. Let's go through each of them, and let's discuss each setting. So maybe the setting actually happens to be the default that you already have. And that's a quick win, right? Because if the benchmark says the system for this particular setting is secure enough and this is what you should have, and you do not tweak it, then presumably the default is enforced and applied. And you are already compliant with that. You just need to apply or enforce the default. The next easy one is your standards may be different from what the CS benchmarks say, because CS benchmark is an industry consensus of people that said a good Windows baseline or good Kubernetes baseline looks like this. Your environment is different. You have specific applications and business need. You will need to tweak it. So if you deviate from the standard for the better, maybe they say minimum password length is 14, and you say we at least do 25, then clearly you will take your more secure default. If it is less than what it says because you have legacy platform, like the infamous mainframe RACF, for the longest they only supported 8-character password, then that's your standard that you actually need to have because you want to have the platform working, running your business processes. And CIS and everybody else can say, make it 25 or 14, you just cannot do it technically. But if you justify it and define it as the deviation, then you can be compliant with the benchmark that you set. The final two really depends on the level of IT jitters, as I call it, or the comfort level. If the setting feels like it will not break anything and IT gets a good comfort, then you can probably roll it out pretty quickly. On the other side, If they say this is going to break something, or if they're even not sure, then you can create a poem or plan of actions and milestone and simply say, we know this setting will not pass. We do not know what the setting is for our environment. And we have a plan of actions. Maybe Q2 next year, we will be looking at making a decision. Can we actually accept that or not? And when you get to the end of this loop, congratulations, you now have the defined baseline that the framework calls for, right? Now, the easier to understand for people, a simple table, all line items in here, and you define, are you going to actually accept that or not? And how is it enforced? And if you are deviating, what the justification is. These 3 columns should make an auditor happy because you have defined a baseline and you are explaining why you're deviating from the best practices, and everybody's happy. The next win or the next step you can do is realize how you will enforce these. So you may have a Terraform template, you may have group policy on the Windows side, you may have some other infrastructure as code platform. And you should start small if you are starting completely from scratch, because even so you feel like nothing will break applying these settings, just go with whatever your rollout of changes is for your organization. The quick win in here is, as I said, the defaults. I think there's like 40% of the benchmark is what the default settings are, especially for a modern version of the platform. So you can implement 40% of the benchmark by simply saying, we are enforcing what's already there. So there is no net new change, so nothing should break. And you figure out how to scale this across the enterprise. As the time goes on, you may spend some time in here, and this really depends on level of risk appetite for changes that you have. Maybe you have chaos engineering is good to go, and people can make changes as they please, and you just roll with it. Then it can be pretty quick. Or you may take a small measured approach or anything in between. It really depends how mature your IT operations are. Now, in the meantime, you have still the settings that you didn't get to yet, and the settings that you know you will not get to until some later time, those poem items. So if you get audited, the auditor should be quite happy because they know why this is a problem. And if they want to write a finding and write you up, say, hey, they are not doing a good job, well, we can say, I told you why I'm not doing this. If this is a big risk for the organization, I need more resources to actually address that. And as you go through this process, because this will mostly be on IT, you can go back and start thinking through the validation, actually. So you have your TVN platform, and I already said that the customization is difficult to do. So maybe you can go through a different thing. And what I'm really saying here is, if you know what the benchmark for you is, and you have a means to apply it across the environment, and you believe that the thing works well, then in theory, you're compliant, right? You just don't have the independent validation of how to validate. And if the configuration of the scan tool is too difficult, maybe if an auditor comes, you can say, pick any 10 systems from this environment, and let's look at them manually and pick 20 findings, 20 line items from this benchmark, and I will prove you that they're all in the known expected state. The benchmark that comes from CIS, it's unlikely you will take everything. We already discussed that. So you can simply go and if the setting is failing, you know why. You have a documentation. If you do want to get your hands dirty and start digging through the audit file in Tenable, or presumably other platforms have something similar, this is actually something that's been working pretty well for us. So I actually customized the file, and I put in a little keyword next to the benchmark ID and the name. And the values are the organization identifier, and then ACC is for accepted, DEF is for define, and poem is I don't care about it for right now. So you know that the accepted is CIS says do this, I'm okay with it, this is my standard. CIS says do this, I cannot do it for whatever reason. You're going to define your own values and change your template to look for that value, right? Because it no longer is the CS benchmark. One quick note, CI specifically says on the website, if you take any of their benchmarks and make any single modification in it, you can no longer call it a CS benchmark, which makes sense because you made changes to it. So it's not theirs, it's yours. But it can be CIS inspired or based on CS benchmark. And if it says if it says a poem in it, then you know that you expect it to fail because you haven't gone through that effort yet. And the cool thing is also you can put in a description. So I put in little tags so that when this comes as a report on the other side, you can actually export it and use some parser and just simply look for these tags and then say, hey, this is our customized baseline and this is the explanation. So if you run this on a weekly basis, it will always come with these explanations and definitions that you define. Well, what does it give you? Thinking back to one of the first slides, I had 182 failed line items that were read. So if I go through all of them and I see that this is an accepted benchmark that should be passing and it's not, then clearly the system is broken. It is not applying whatever we believe it should be. If it is a define and it fails, then you have to look first thing, you made customization in the template, you could have made a mistake. So validate that the scan is looking for the right values and it's correct. And if it is, then it's clear that again the system is broken and it may have gotten out of compliance. Maybe a patch was applied, maybe it was compromised, maybe a user did something to it. Whatever the reason, this is a quick and easy way to say these systems are diverging from my baseline. Let's bring them back and maybe investigate why. And if it is the poem, then you expect it to fail again, so let's just ignore it, right? And you may be like, well, why should I ignore it? Well, again, you made an informed decision. And by the way, if you do not realize this, all organizations inherently accept the risk of running the business however they run it, right? So whether it's documented or not, if you are okay running Windows Millennium and you said this is fine, somebody made the decision, right? So at least you can have a definition and make sure that an auditor can come and say, this is failing and this is why. Those custom nodes are really excellent as well because again, a third party can review the scan results and maybe it comes like all green and they're like, whoa, how did you do that, right? It's like, well, I made changes. Well, how can I trust that this template now, right? Because you deviated from the benchmark. Well, you can give them a report and say, these are the accepted things that accepted, they match 100%. These are the defined, and these are the things we don't worry about it just yet. And maybe we turn them green so we can ignore them for now and not see all those red findings. You may now be thinking the nightmare of editing the audit file after you make all these changes. When the new version comes out, you start again from scratch. But because you got ahead of it by knowing what the common baseline is and looking for changes, maybe there are 10 new line items in the audit file coming from Tenable, so you can cherry pick those, insert them at the end of this template file, make sure the IDs match, and now your baseline that you worked on so hard, you just made a few changes, and now it's compliant with the latest version. There are a few misconceptions that I often see, and I wanted to highlight them in here. As you discussed the baseline, I have heard oftentimes that our baseline is defined in the golden image that we use to deploy everything else. Well, there are some problems with that. For one, where is your change control in that image? Right? If somebody can spin it up, make changes, and deploy it, it keeps changing. Nobody knows how it's changing. And because the baseline is defined in an image, when you deploy an instance of that image, over time that will be deviating. So now it's not compliant with that, and you cannot really get the compliance there. So I was always advocating for documenting this. Using an Excel file is a good starting point. The counter argument was, well, come on, it's modern times. Why would I keep an Excel spreadsheet with some of this information? Well, if you don't want to keep an Excel spreadsheet, you can keep your infrastructure as code template, and you will have version control in there. And you can simply say, this is the settings that get applied every time we spin a new container or a new server. And you can annotate, put comments in there. And because it is version controlled, you know what the changes have been made and how it should look. The other thing that, when we kind of get started, if you hear people saying, we run the vulnerability scan so that we know what we need to patch, that kind of makes sense, but it's actually backwards. It's putting the cart in front of the horse. Because you should have a patch management already that takes care of these patches. You are proactively doing that, and the scan comes and validates that you didn't miss anything. If you're consistently missing something, then your process is broken. And so it pretty much the same thing, but people just rely on the scan results as like, well, it tells us what to do. Like, you already should know what you should be doing. This is just the validation. And the same applies for the compliance scans, because we just say, well, we accept the CS benchmark. Well, okay, well, let's roll it out and see what breaks. And things break. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Well, so you should know what you are expecting from the baseline, and then ask the scan to validate that it's actually in place, rather than telling the scan, these are all the deviations, and then let me figure out what we need to do. So some takeaways. The consolidation of the benchmark, I think, is as painful as it is to go through. It gives you the big, bang for the buck. Like, you now have the baseline defined, and if you stay on top of the individual changes, then it shouldn't be that difficult next time you do it. You will need to go through it once and decide, do I take the recommendation as is? Are we okay with it? Or do we have a deviation for whatever reason, and explain why? And if you cannot do it, it's okay to kick the can down the road, as I already talked about it. If an auditor has a problem with your compliance scan not being up to snuff, then you have justification from leadership that says, this is a problem, give us resources to fix it. That gives you the documented baseline, which actually in all the security frameworks, like that's a major win, right? Because an auditor will come and they will say, do you have a documented baseline? And you give them, here it is. And if you keep on top of the different versions and new version of the operating system and the baseline, then this will be easier to do in the future. We kind of got started with it, so I don't know how true that statement is. I will know, when 2025 server comes out, because I think it's in preview still, and it's still not available for like commercial deployment. And CIS, I looked yesterday, does not have a benchmark for it as well. But when it comes, I will simply go and look, how is it different from 2022? And maybe I'll find 10 different settings. I'm going to incorporate them in the baseline and in the audit file, and I should be good to go. And the customization of your TVM tool, depends what the tool can do, but don't be just hung up if the tool cannot do it, because as I said, there may be an alternative way of, if the auditor needs to validate, you can probably do sampling, and to make sure that you're not cheating, you can ask the auditor, this is the list of system we have, pick any number of them, and let's go through them and validate. All right, that's the last slide. So now I can open it for any questions and comments, concerns. All right, I don't hear any. So hopefully you enjoy the zombie horde pictures. Thank you.